Welcome back, everybody. So the tobacco market opened for business yesterday after 141 days of being banned under the national lockdown. Some experts, however, say that the illicit cigarette trade has put down its roots in the South African landscape and will dominate in the foreseeable future. One expert on the illicit trade of cigarettes says that the market shares lost big by big companies during the ban will remain as consumers now have access to cheaper tobacco products. Telita Snyckers is an independent illicit tobacco trade expert and former attorney and executive at the South African Revenue Service. She's joining us now. She also released her book recently called Dirty Tobacco, Spies, Lies and Mega Profit. Great to have you, Telita. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, good morning. It's lovely talking to you today.
I mean, this is quite a scary assertion, to be honest with you, that I know that there's been huge fights to try and get rid of the illicit cigarette market in South Africa and many moves to try and, eradicate it. That was never going to happen. But what's happened now is you're saying that people will more than likely continue with the illicit market because it is cheaper and they've now gotten used to it.
Well, absolutely. So we know that before the lockdown, that controlled the vast majority of the market. And they have lost market share to the point where they now only control 9% of the market. And what's happened is that the supply chains have become so entrenched, and South Africans have discovered an easy way of getting access to illicit cigarettes. And because it's almost a way of revolting against a government that people don't want to fund anymore, the likelihood of it remaining entrenched is high. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the reason why illicit trade flourishes in South Africa the way it does is because we have systemic weaknesses in the way we treat the tobacco supply chain. So we have no production controls. We have no ability to trace cigarette packs back to their point of manufacture. We have no minimum pricing policies. And so all of those systemic weaknesses are the reasons why the illicit trade has managed to gain a foothold to the extent that it has.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at the market, I was hearing during the lockdown, illicit cigarette prices had gone up by somewhere close on 400%, if not more. And now, suddenly, obviously overnight, now that it's now legal, you can go out and buy your normal brand, the brand that you were used to smoking, but you haven't perhaps smoked in a while. The illicit market has gone down again, so they're still wanting to keep their customers. I mean, is this what you're seeing as well?
Well, absolutely. So when you look at the studies that people like Professor Corneille van Walbeek had done, they already hinted at the threat of a price war, and he was absolutely correct. So we know that the week before the ban was lifted, a pack of cigarettes might have cost you 70 Rand for the cheaper brands. And as the ban was lifted, or we got notice that it would be lifted, those packs were immediately being sold for 10 Rand a pack. Which is well below the tax threshold. But if it only makes you R1.50 to make a pack of cigarettes, both the cigarette manufacturers are making a killing and, smokers still get access to cheap cigarettes.
Mm. It's unbelievable. And I'm going to ask you a very dumb question. It's something that I saw somebody posing on social media. If the illicit industry is there, it's working. We know where it is. It's there for everybody to see. Why not just tax the illicit trade of cigarettes and put them on the market?
Well, one thing is, of course, SARS can tax the profits from illicit trade. And certainly we've done so with drug dealers. So it's not impossible. The main issue is that when it comes to cigarette trade, is you don't want to target the truck drivers. You want to get to the kingpins. And the reason it's difficult to do in South Africa is precisely because we actually can't trace the packs back to specific manufacturers. You have to remember that different factories can make the same brands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which really leaves a bit of a bitter and sour taste in my mouth, I have to say, because what does that tell you about our law enforcement agencies? I mean, if they can't trace them down, what work are they doing? And do they actually perhaps maybe not have the intent of tracking them down because there are people benefiting that shouldn't be benefiting?
Well, I think there are some changes that could be introduced relatively easily. But we know that historically the tobacco industry has been inordinately powerful in South Africa. So, for instance, SARS has been trying to introduce a track and trace system for cigarettes. And a company like BAT was vehemently and vocally opposed to the introduction to track and trace in South Africa. So you have to wonder why a big company like BAT would oppose the introduction of what's an obvious and sensible solution to the illicit trade in South Africa.
I mean, that does raise many questions. I mean, when we look at the market that's we're talking about it, it's gold leaf tobacco, Carnalinks, Best Tobacco, Amalgamated Tobacco. These are the companies that we really are referring to when we say coming in and almost taking over this illicit market now because of the banning of your likes of British American tobacco. What do we know about those companies? And, who owns them? Where do they trade? What is the story there with them?
Well, look, historically, BAT used to dominate the local South African market. But because it's such a profitable market, of course, we would have seen smaller, low-cost manufacturers emerging over time. And what's interesting is that all of the tobacco companies, without fail, have some kind of political links. So every single one of them we can trace back to some kind of political backing. And so their ownership is known. The existence of these companies isn't a mystery. All we need to do is to introduce proper production controls at the factories so that we can see exactly what volumes they've actually produced. And it's as simple as that.
It sounds so simple, and it's something that one would think, okay, well, let's do it. I mean, because it's a benefit to the country. But, when we're talking from a SARS perspective, you were there, you worked at SARS, you know how this works. Just a very quick question. The vaping industry in South Africa, it's also been operating kind of under the radar without being taken to task during the ban. What happened in this industry?
Well, so vaping is a fascinating industry because they tend to argue that they should be treated differently to other tobacco products from a policy perspective. Because they argue that they are potentially a lower risk than traditional smoking products. And so we see that policy positions and enforcement positions when it comes to vaping aren't as strict and aren't as strongly enforced or controlled as they would be for traditional tobacco products.
Yeah. Just finally, I'm loath to let you go because I've got so many questions to ask you, but your book that you released, and funnily enough, it was in May this year, so obviously you've been working on this for a while. I don't know if there's a whole new spin on it during the lockdown and after what we've seen happening, dirty tobacco, spies, lies, and mega profits. So did you take into account, I suppose you didn't have a chance, anything that happened during the lockdown?
No, when you publish a book, the manuscript is actually finished months before it's actually released. So the timing in terms of releasing the book and in terms of the ban was very coincidental. But a lot of the predictions I made in the book have actually, we can now see in play. So it's actually interesting seeing how some of the revelations in the book are actually playing out right now under the ban.
Telita, what a pleasure speaking to you. I'm going to get a copy of this book as fast as I can because I think this has become very fascinating in this industry and what's been happening behind the scenes during this lockdown, even prior to the lockdown. Telita Snyckers, an independent illicit tobacco trade expert and also a former attorney and executive at SARS, has released her book. It's called Dirty Tobacco, Spies, Lies, and Mega Profits. So taking a look at that illicit tobacco trade, which now, as she's saying, has firmly put its roots in South Africa. And are we ever going to get rid of it? All right, let's take a break. See you after this.